I'm Jason Kander.
I'm Ravi Gupta.
And I'm Grace Lynch.
And this is Majority 54, the podcast for meaningful conversations that change minds, change votes, and win elections. Grace, Ravi, and I were just talking, and we came to the consensus that listeners would probably like to know more about Grace. So let's start with, what was this reporting trip you were on?
Oh, that's a great question. So I am working on a show about the Texas education system. It is going to be a follow-up in some ways to Winning Wisconsin, which I made back in 2020, about Wisconsin's outsized role in our electoral system in regard to presidential elections. And this is the outsized role Texas plays on the nation's education, dating back to the 70s and 80s and some of the textbook censorship activism that was happening at the time, and coming up to the modern CRT debate. So I got to drive around Texas with Sarah Schleid, who also works on this show. We, I think, covered about 700 miles in 3 days and talked to people in 5 different little towns or cities, and had some really interesting conversations and confrontations. So it was a whirlwind and very exciting.
Tell us about the confrontation.
Oh, there's just some real fascinating characters in this series who have played large roles in the Texas education system. A man who works in an office with no AC and no windows in the burning hot heat. He also doesn't eat 5 days out of the week. He's very peculiar. And a creationist dentist. So there's little teases and things to come.
And when are you and Harrison getting married? I said they want to know more about you.
Great question. Yeah.
You're engaged.
I am
Do you have
engaged.
A date?
We're very excited. We are trying to get married next summer, along with everyone else in the world who postponed their wedding during COVID. So we will see, but there's still a lot of plans to be determined.
The live recording of Majority 54 would be the rehearsal dinner night?
That's what we were hoping, if that wasn't too much of an imposition, but maybe the morning after would also be a real hoot and a half for everybody.
I'll take a look at my calendar.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's exciting. Okay. Well, let's talk some trash. I'm very excited for this first Talking Trash part, because it is about John Fetterman and just trolling people on Twitter, and it is actually rather delightful.
It just has so many good elements to it. So John Fetterman's running for U.S. Senate, Pennsylvania, a seat that we absolutely must take. And he's running against Dr. Oz, TV celebrity. And Fetterman, if people don't know, is kind of a different kind of candidate. He's 6'8", wears a hoodie, and is kind of like his own star in his own right. And he is definitely stylistically different than a lot of Democrats we see. He has definitely embraced the trolling. So he's been talking about Dr. Oz's residency, because Dr. Oz lives in Jersey and he's trying to run in Pennsylvania for the U.S. Senate. And, Fetterman has had some jokes about it.
Fetterman and his team also know very, very well how to use Twitter to their advantage. One of his frequent attacks against Oz is for living in Jersey before crossing lines to run for Senate. He is now selling Dr. Oz for New Jersey bumper stickers on his website, and he even had a plane fly this banner over the Jersey Shore last weekend that said, "Hey, Dr. Oz, welcome home to New Jersey. Love, John."
Fetterman has said things like he's not one of us. He calls him Doc Hollywood. He talks about how Oz moved in with his mother-in-law.
Moved in with his mother-in-law in order to be able to run. In Pennsylvania, yeah.
But some of my favorite parts of this, as a guy who spent a lot of time in the Jersey Shore, is that he paid for Snooki do a video from the show The Jersey Shore, in which she laments Dr. Oz's exodus from the great state of New Jersey.
Hey, Maymet, this is Nicole Snooki. And I'm from Jersey Shore. I don't know if you've seen of it before, but I heard that you moved from New Jersey to Pennsylvania to look for a new job. And personally, I don't know why anyone would want to leave Jersey, because it's like the best place ever, and we're all hot messes. But I want to say best of luck to you. I know you're away from home and you're in a new place, but Jersey will not forget you. I just want to let you know I will not forget you.
Great use of campaign funds, by the way. Ton of earned media there for that. But I just like the bravado here.
I think my favorite part of these ads is the one where He talks about how Dr. Oz is holding himself up as like a champion of the working man, and then it just shows on the screen like a Dr. Oz being worth like $104 million, and then it just cuts back to Fetterman in a very authentic way, just going like, okay, like it's kind of perfect.
I've really appreciated his self-deprecating humor throughout, and to turn that kind of same quipness against Oz for something that is so ridiculous, like the fact that he really is not from Pennsylvania and certainly doesn't really live there, is just really delightful. And I think it's a kind of a new way of effectively using social media and campaign ads that we haven't really seen from many Democrats, I don't think, at least that have this much fun. That just doesn't ever seem to be the case.
So, not to be serious during talking trash, but I think that ultimately this race in Pennsylvania is going to be a test of just how partisan and parliamentary our politics are now, right? I mean, it has been a repeated pattern over the last several years that states don't go a different direction. This is not a presidential election, but that Senate races during presidential years don't go the opposite direction of how the presidential race goes. And this is a situation where we have a midterm election with a Democratic president where there's a lot of Republicans that are like, we just want to take the Senate no matter what. I mean, that's the whole theory behind Oz's candidacy in Pennsylvania, right? It's like, let's put up a guy who's got his own money and got his own name, and we won't have to worry about that. And we'll just count on the idea that there'll be enough voters who'll be like, we just want a Republican. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, you have a pretty compelling candidate. Like, you know, Fetterman is a guy who's going to cross over a lot of different genres. He should be somebody who should have a good chance to get a lot of independent voters, and he's got this knock on Oz to be like, you don't live here, you're not from here. So if Oz wins, then I think you can pretty well settle into the idea of like, yeah, people are just voting party in Senate and congressional elections. It's just like a parliamentary election in that way.
I do think we have a better chance of keeping the Senate than we do of keeping the House. And I think that's good news, because if I were to pick one of the two, I would pick the Senate, first of all, because they're 6-year terms. So they're a little bit more stable. Two, that allows us to confirm people. So I think by sheer numbers, not even just the 6-year terms, but by the sheer scarcity of the U.S. Senate, that would be good. So I'm slightly hopeful there. Obviously, the House is looking tougher for us, especially with some of the recent redistricting news. But so we'll just keep an eye on that. And I think this is a big one for us because this would be a pickup. So, but that's not the only trash that we need to talk. Jason, you had something you wanted to bring to the table.
Well, I saw this just before we started recording here that I guess Tucker Carlson last night said he was talking about George Soros.
You were just curled up watching a little Tucker last night.
Yeah,
True?
As one does. Yes, that's right. I put on Fox News for True like I do every night. I was like, we're not going to watch the All-Star game, True. We're going to figure out who we hate today, and so we're going to watch some Fox. No, the truth is, last night True and I were at a Hustlers game, but I did see this clip this morning of Tucker Carlson lamenting the idea that George Soros has any influence at all in American politics.
Now, why is some foreign-born billionaire allowed to change our country fundamentally? That's the big question.
And I just think it is funny because, like, Rupert Murdoch, who's from Australia and a billionaire, has been like paying his paycheck for a very long time and seems to have fundamentally changed our country in a major way.
Also, Elon Musk.
Right.
Yeah.
South African.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So like we're nothing but just swirling around with some quote foreign-born billionaires who are trying to dictate how we talk to each other and what we're saying.
It's the American dream.
Let's get to the news of the week. And this is a really sad story. So I want to highlight the story because we talked about Dobbs and we talk about the law, we talk about the politics, but I think it's really important to ground this in the stories of real people trying to wrestle with the consequences of this decision. And so there was this case in Ohio that was really tragic. There is this 10-year-old girl who was raped, and because of the law in Ohio, there's a 2019 trigger law in Ohio. Because of that law, she could not get an abortion in Ohio. So she crossed state lines, went to Indiana to get an abortion. And the Indy Star, which is a really reputable publication, which has multiple Pulitzer Prizes from what I understand, there is a writer there named Shari Radavsky who is an 18-year veteran reporter and is on the health and medical beat. She wrote a story about this 10-year-old girl traveling to Indy to get this procedure, and quickly all havoc broke out. Biden mentioned this story in a speech, and that was enough for the right wing to just go absolutely insane. The story potentially was single sourced, so the right wing just took that as an opportunity to say that it was false.
Why did the Biden administration, speaking of lying, just repeat a story about a 10-year-old child who got pregnant and then got an abortion or was not allowed to get an abortion, when it turns out the story was not true?
There's no shortage of 10-year-old rape victims. There's victims from infants through the elderly, both genders. There is more than you can count. There are so many monsters out there. So for me, what I find so deeply offensive is that they had to make up a fake one.
Let's turn to Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. So Dave, have you had anybody come to you in your state to say we're looking into this? A police report was filed?
Not a whisper anywhere.
And so you had the Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost saying there was, quote, not a scintilla of evidence. It was a fabrication. Tucker Carlson said it turns out the story was not true. Jesse Waters said it was a mainstream media hoax. The Wall Street Journal editorial board said it was an abortion story too good to be true, which strange, or too good to confirm, which is strange language. Now, turns out the story was true. The Columbus Dispatch confirmed it, and they confirmed that she was raped by a 27-year-old man. And I think this was illustrative of just a pathology on the right where they're just unwilling to accept the consequences of their own policy decisions.
Yeah, I mean, everything about the story is tragic. And every element of a person who becomes pregnant not being able to receive the health care they need is tragic. It doesn't need to be this extreme for it to be tragic. And this is a particularly horrifying instance. But again, I just feel compelled to remind everyone that it is always horrifying if someone can't receive the health care that they need. And to watch it become a political football has been extremely sickening. And I think that, to your point, Ravi, it is really clear that the right really wants to outlaw abortion without wanting to deal with any of those repercussions. I mean, the attorney general for Ohio then went back to say, like, she would have never needed to leave Ohio. Like, the law would have allowed.
Yeah.
Or, well, he said it was false, but then once it was proven, he said that she wouldn't have needed to leave Ohio because there are medical exceptions broader than just the life of the mother in the Ohio law. However, that is actually not true.
Yeah, that's what I was saying was false, to be clear.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were saying he originally said it was false, which he did.
Yeah.
And so for one, like, you're right. That was not true. That's not what the law states. It says that you could only be used to prevent the death of the pregnant woman and to prevent a serious risk of the substantial and irreversible impairment of a bodily function, which it has to both be substantial and irreversible. I would also argue that there's a lot of ambiguity in all of that. What quantifies substantial and irreversible of a bodily function? How at risk of death does someone need to be? Like, if I'm 20% at risk, then can I do it? If I'm 40% at risk? Because once we get to 100, that's it. So it's like, where are we drawing these lines? And those are the questions that Republicans really don't want to answer. And I saw this play out in another space, which was the House Oversight and Reform Committee had Erin Hawley testify. I don't know if either of you saw this, wife of Josh Hawley. She's one of the main architects behind the case that was presented in front of the Supreme Court. She's very passionate about restricting access to abortion in almost all instances. And she was being questioned by Representative Ayanna Pressley about how to treat an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy that occurs outside of the uterus. The procedure to remove these fundamentally unviable, very dangerous pregnancies is an abortion. Ayanna Pressley was asking her to confirm that these pregnancies are not viable, that you do need to abort them. And her response was, that's not abortion.
Again, could you just answer the question? When an ectopic pregnancy ruptures, what are the chances that it can be safely carried to term? And you know what, just to make this even clearer, I'm looking for a number between 0 to 100. Can you give me a percentage?
Sure, I believe zero ectopic pregnancies, even those that do not rupture, have a chance of successfully being carried to term. That's why the treatment for them is not an abortion.
Reclaiming my time. It seems that there is a deficit in your understanding of reproductive health. When it comes to one's accurate understanding of reproductive health and abortion care with an ectopic pregnancy, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists says, quote, treatment for ectopic pregnancy requires ending a non-viable pregnancy. This is my time, end quote. So now I'm going to turn to the real experts.
That's not an abortion because it does not have the intent to end the life of a child.
Reclaiming my time.
Because an ectopic pregnancy cannot result in a living child, that's not abortion. The treatment for that wouldn't be abortion. And I understand that to her, it might not feel like abortion. However, medically speaking, exact same. And legally speaking, the exact same. And right now, The Daily actually put out an episode this morning, Wednesday morning, about how doctors are already very hesitant to provide miscarriage care because the treatment for a miscarriage is identical to the treatment for an abortion. And so women are showing up to the hospital bleeding profusely in immense pain and being told that unless they start bleeding a like hemorrhaging amount that would like quantify life at risk, there's nothing they can do.
And the penalty is a year in prison in Ohio if the doctor gets that wrong.
And so now we have doctors not providing women just healthcare they actively need. 1 in 4 pregnancies result in miscarriages. That's so many. And we're just saying sorry, or not even saying sorry, just either saying that's not abortion, which it is, or too bad.
We're saying like that didn't happen. So I think there's two things here at play. One, it is the GOP quite clearly admitting that they're wrong about this, but refusing to admit it, right? I mean, like when you're like, no, that 10-year-old didn't exist, you're exposing the fact that you're like, yes, this law, if that 10-year-old did exist, this law would cause that. So you're just like, nope, doesn't exist, didn't happen, because you're confessing that this is a major oversight in this already terrible law. Then the second part of this is, and I guess I've got avoidance on the brain because I've been doing these interviews about my book for 2 weeks. And so I talk about this concept of avoidance where when you have trauma, you have things that you don't want to face, you avoid them and you find different ways to do it. And I feel like on guns, on all sorts of stuff, it's just trauma that the nation is undergoing. And there's a certain portion of the population that is just like, I will be avoiding that emotion. I will not be taking that in. And I will not be taking that in via pretending that it doesn't exist, right? So we see this with conspiracy theories about mass shootings where all of a sudden, oh no, it's a false flag or and I think we often have trouble figuring out how those happen. I think they're avoidance. And in this case, it's like, nope, we will just be saying that didn't happen and that is made up, because otherwise we might have to feel the feelings associated with this and act accordingly. And that's not something we're going to do. And so that's what it reminds me of, is it's just a party-wide attempt an emotional avoidance to avoid having to take any action to do the right thing.
Well, the reaction here is insane, right? So Jesse Waters, once it became clear that this young girl did exist and this event did happen, the rape happened, and she did go to Indianapolis.
Like the dude was arrested. Like they arrested a guy for it.
Well, okay, so he was arrested and he was arraigned, right? You know how many people showed up for this? One reporter. Her name's Bethany Bruner for the Columbus Dispatch. So all these people who care about this case, couldn't be bothered to show up when the consequences of this were actually on full display because they weren't really interested in the journalism. But the right-wing media sprung into action. Jesse Waters took credit for the prosecution. So he turned around from saying it didn't exist to saying, we brought attention to it. Town Hall's Matt Vespa accused progressives of celebrating the crime. So what I want to know is, how do we talk about the consequences of their policies without being accused of celebrating it? A whole separate question. Indiana AG Tabarokita then started talking about going after the doctor who performed this, and turned out the doctor did everything legally that the doctor was supposed to do, but it was like trying to go after her for not filing the proper paperwork, etc. Fox News then pointed to the immigration status of the person who raped the girl, allegedly, and tried to make it about that instead of their faulty reporting. I mean, I could go on, but clearly they're doing everything but apologizing for, blatantly lying to their viewers and listeners.
Well, like Jim Jordan had a tweet where he said it was all a lie, and then when it was clear that it wasn't a lie, he just deleted it, which to me is like the metaphor for the whole thing, right? Like that's how they approach all this stuff. When they get something wrong, they just pretend that it never happened. Like I remember at one point, I don't remember who said it, but I remember at one point in 2016 when Trump was running and people thought he wasn't going to win, somebody said that one day Donald Trump will look into a camera and say, "What are you talking about? I never ran for president." And it's like, that's what this all is. It's like they just go, no, none of that ever happened.
And to me, the point is not the gross blatant lies. That, at this point, I would say is par for the course. What is clear is that there is no plan or ability to properly enforce barbaric laws. And that's what the Republicans have been very clear, that they want abortion to be criminalized. And then when it comes time to pursue that, they are faced with the horrifying reality of what that actually means. And I think hammering home that, like, there is no way to legislate personal, immediate, fast-moving medical decisions on a case-by-case basis. There's no clear way forward, and all it's going to do is cause pain.
Well, let's also not miss the fact that they pounced on this knowing that they could say that it wasn't real. And the reason they knew they could say it wasn't real is because it was a 10-year-old girl who was raped, and that they were capitalizing on the fact that they knew that the reporter and the doctor would never out the girl, that they knew they would do the right thing and that they would keep the girl's identity confidential. And so they had free reign to do this and to further this 10-year-old girl's trauma. Like, that's sick. Like, that is wholly fucked up to just be like, hey, we can just say this with abandon because the person at the center of the story is never going to come forward because the people around them are going to rightfully protect them. But we don't have those morals or those qualms, so we'll just go ahead and run straight ahead. Like, that's pretty, like wow. Grace, how long now have you been on the Athletic Greens train?
I've been on Athletic Greens now for over a year, and I'm never going back. And I will say that when I went on this reporting trip to Texas, I brought with me my little travel packs. And one morning I was filling it up, standing outside with my rental car, and a slight breeze came by, and a lot of the powder started to fly away. And I actually yelped and went, "Oh no, my greens."
So you have a choice in this situation, right? You can either go with a smaller dosage of your greens for the day, or you can rip open another bag and be like, this is an excuse to get extra greens today.
You know what you do is like that Bradley Cooper movie Limitless. You just lick it off the ground, just frantically.
That's the correct answer.
Yeah, that's the correct answer. But, you may be asking yourself, what is that substance that's blowing in the wind in some town in Texas? It's Athletic Greens AG1. Folks over at Athletic Greens are going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/majority. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/majority to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
Now, a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Look, I'm still in the middle of this whole book tour where I'm just talking about therapy all the time. And what's interesting is how many people I talk to who sometime during the conversation, these are people who are interviewing me, are like, yeah, I've been to therapy. The truth is, like, a lot of people have been to therapy, but we kind of act like they haven't. And look, my thinking is that people who haven't been to therapy are intimidated by it for whatever reason. Well, that's why our sponsor, BetterHelp, is a great opportunity. If you're a little bit intimidated by the concept of it, this certainly makes it more accessible.
Well, BetterHelp is online therapy, and what I love about it is they have video, phone, and even live chat online therapy sessions. If you don't want to, you don't have to see somebody on camera, but you obviously could, and you get matched with a therapist in under 48 hours, so they move fast. And our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/M54. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/M54. Let's talk about another big issue in the news right now, which is inflation. So we got our CPI numbers last week, the inflation numbers, and inflation's up 9.1% over June of the prior year. That is the highest rise since 1981. This is being driven by a host of factors, including energy, which is up 7.5%, gas, which is obviously a subset of energy, was up 11.2% from June over May, food 10%, I could go on. And obviously, this is linked to interest rate hikes. We've seen some already. A lot of people are saying we're going to see some steep hikes ahead. We could be heading for a recession. What does this mean politically? I think a lot of people, understandably, think this could be the final nail in the coffin for November results. We don't talk like that or think like that because there's plenty of time between now and then. But what do we need to see from Democrats here in talking about this issue, including Biden?
I think it's not good, Robbie. I'm going to come in with my expert analysis. This is not good. But what concerns me most from Democrats is like nobody seems to be able to agree on why this is happening and what to do about it. Right? Like there's a bunch of different takes on where to go, who to blame. You know, part of it is let's blame Putin. Part of it is let's blame what was left over to us by Trump. But, you know, and that could all be right. But a cohesive message is necessary.
Yeah, you know, Pelosi called it Putin's price hike, which I just find this unhelpful. Like, it's not true that's what's the primary thing driving this. So that, you know, it's both false, but also not politically helpful. You know, but one thing that is really helpful is that Biden a year ago called inflation temporary. And he said, quote, "There's nobody suggesting there's unchecked inflation on the way. No serious economists." I'm sure that's not going to show up in any campaign ad this fall whatsoever.
Yeah. In preparing for this, I tried my best to make sense of these numbers as not an economist. And there's a great piece in The Atlantic by Derek Thompson. It's called The Everything is Weird Economy. It came out earlier this week. And it's just a really excellent breakdown of like why everything feels so squirrely and kind of why no one can talk about it competently. Because inflation is up, but gas prices are actually dropping. Amos Hochstein, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, he's the presidential coordinator on energy security, was on Face the Nation earlier this week and was giving like a great detailed breakdown of how most gas prices now are under the $5 a gallon, which is still a lot, but like is dropping from kind of some of
it's like $4.19 by my house.
Right. It is dropping from kind of the super crazy prices we were seeing earlier this year. So like that should be a good sign. And yet our inflation numbers are higher than ever. You know, employment's up, but like overall like GDP growth is down. The stock market's tanking, but people are vacationing. Like just like the fact that like nothing really seems to point in a coherent direction. And he gives some ideas as to why that could be. And a lot of it is responding from COVID. With the Great Resignation, we now have a lot of jobs frantically rehiring, but a low percentage of that workforce is properly trained to actually do this job. So the output isn't still there and that everything's just kind of laggy and discombobulated. He still ultimately concludes that recession is likely, but paints a more well-rounded picture of why things are so weird. Similarly, Felix Salmon and Emily Peck of Axios were talking on Slate Money about how, like, we are not technically in a recession. However, everyone just has recession vibes. Like, everyone just feels bad about the economy. And that to me was honestly, I felt like the more important takeaway is that even if these numbers are conflicting, even if some indicators are improving, everyone feels crappy. And that should be something that I would hope politicians could actually speak to in a more compelling way, because they don't have to get into the wompy, swampy numbers nonsense, but could actually just speak to the fact that here's what people are experiencing and here's our empathy and our ideas for that. But it seems that there's no cohesion, and using Putin as a boogeyman just seems extremely non-compelling and not helpful at this point in time.
Well, for one thing, when you use Putin in a war that we don't seem to have any way to stop, it just points to something that people go, well, what can we do about that? And when the answer is nothing, well, all you've done is you've pointed to a cause that you can't actually control for. And therefore you've given yourself no ability to be the party that people go, well, we'll go with you because you seem to be able to fix the problem.
Well, do either of you have a thought on how that could be messaged better?
Well, I think we, as important as economists are, I think sometimes it's like it's the politicians, that are going to have some of they're going to be working it out in public, almost like comedians working out in clubs. And this is where I think like it has to be something simple, like what Jared Polis said the other week when he was like, what's the solution? Let's lower tariffs and increase immigration. Right. And I think like, first of all, it's true. Like those are two things that actually would help with inflation. It's practical. It gives somebody something to look towards. But also, both of those are things that you could lay at the foot of your opponents as well, right? Like who pushed those tariffs and who's restricting immigration. And so people could add to those two or have a different two, but like I think it's as simple as that. And I think like when people hear something like it's Putin's price hike, it sounds disingenuous, and people are smart enough to know that it's not accurate. And I think it just adds to a sense that Biden doesn't want to take ownership over this, which I think unfortunately is true. Like, obviously I support the man, but it's like he hasn't taken ownership over this. Like he'll start to take ownership over it, but then he'll do things like this and say things like calling it Putin's price hike. And, like they cheered on the gas numbers this week. I'm on these all these email lists from the White House. They're just, the tone is wrong. The substance is wrong. I just really wish they'd be better about this kind of stuff.
Well, to Governor Polis's point about tariffs and immigration, I happened to be on a call this week for work with a friend of mine who's a very dedicated Democrat and also happens to work in private equity. So not a ton of like very liberal people who work in private equity. So I always find his views interesting. And he was like, look, man, there's parts of this that aren't that complicated. Like part of the reason we have inflation is we have a labor shortage. And yet like we apparently are going out of our way to keep immigration from happening. He's like, it makes no sense. He's like, we don't have people that work these jobs. Maybe we should let some people into the country to work these jobs. Like, but you can't say that. And he's right. Like, maybe we should just be like, no, actually, we need some of these people.
Yeah. An interesting comparison is the UK is currently grappling with some of the worst inflation rates in all of Europe. And that's unsurprisingly very related to Brexit, where many of their, service working jobs were done by Europeans from all over Europe. And now those folks can no longer get visas, cannot stay and work there. And so they've left, which means that even though this is a globally felt phenomenon, a country that is purposefully limiting those that can functionally work there is experiencing it harder than any other.
Yeah, I think this is a winning issue right now. And I think not only do I think it's a winning issue, especially as we look ahead to 2024, because in part we're trying to win this next election, but we're also starting a narrative that's going to play out in that election. Assuming it's Trump or DeSantis, these are highly, anti-immigrant politicians. Trump always in many ways his victory to repeated racist rhetoric against immigrants in this country. This would be us going on the offensive, not just being like, hey, for reasons that we all believe, like the values of this country and the inclusivity and all that, good, but also for self-interested reasons that you could see with your own eyes. Like I agree, like you talk to people in the UK, I think they're a few years ahead of us in the sense of just the problem is more severe there than it is here, but we're quickly going to get to where they are. Like when people can't, whether they're business owners, can't find people to do basic jobs, everything gets more expensive, you can't find people to teach in schools. Like you start to go through this, you can't find doctors, nurses, go up and down the ladder of income in this country and the different types of jobs that we have. People are going to start to feel it more and more and more, and Democrats can turn this issue that Republicans have been demagoguing into a very practical kitchen table issue.
And it's something that people are experiencing in their everyday lives, so you don't have to explain it, right? I mean, like you go to a restaurant and everybody is like, boy, the service is slow. And everybody goes, yeah, it's been really slow since COVID. They can't find anybody to work. Even, conservatives are fond of saying nobody wants to work. Well, I mean, the window is right there for, or it's right there to walk right through. I don't know if you walk through a window. I do this a lot on this show where I just like completely mash up to,
well, if you want to rob
the door
place,
is open. Yeah. The door is open to walk right through. I mean, but you're right. It is at all levels. Like flights are getting canceled, and it has nothing to do with weather. And it's because they're like, well, we don't have a crew. Either we don't have pilots or we don't have flight attendants. Or so, there's lots of room for more immigration of all types.
Yeah, what's the Gretzky saying? Like, skate where the puck is going, right? This is where it's going, right? Like, let's get ahead of this and say, all right, like, this is the narrative. Like, people are starting to care about it more and more and more. Like, my sense is this is going to be a dominant issue in no time.
Over the last few weeks of this book tour, I have been enduring a very severe case of shingles. They're awful, and they give you a lot of generalized pain. I often talk about in these ads how great it is to get back to my Helix mattress. But let me tell you, it really has been great to get back to my Helix mattress because I have been in a lot of pain and just sort of like sucking it up and doing these interviews. So there's 2 lessons here. The first lesson is that you should get yourself a Helix mattress. The other lesson is that I remain one tough dude.
Yeah, fun story. First time you and I spoke on the phone ever. I had shingles when we spoke. I don't recommend it, but like you, I do recommend Helix. Just go to helixsleep.com/majority54, take their 2-minute sleep quiz, and they'll match you to a customized mattress that will give you the best sleep of your life. And you get to try it out for 100 nights risk-free. And they'll even pick it up for you if you don't love it, but of course you will. And they're offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners if you go to helixsleep.com/majority54. That's helixsleep.com/majority54 for up to $200 off and 2 free pillows. Speaking of where the puck is going, this is a bad transition. The puck is going to some not good places on climate. Some really hot and scary places. And Biden, as we record this on Wednesday, he, I think today, is going to either declare a climate emergency or declare certain aggressive steps on climate. He's in Massachusetts at a former coal-fired plant. And this, his whatever announcements he comes out with today will be in the context of a failed effort in the United States Senate to pass an ambitious $300 billion climate package that Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, at least for the moment, seems to be backing away from. And Manchin is citing inflation in part for his desire to slow that package down. My questions are always political and how to talk to people in your life, but like, climate change is obviously becoming more and more dire. We're running out of time. UK is seeing record heat waves. I don't know. I don't even know what my question is other than to like, what do we make of all of this?
For me, the thing that feels extremely short-sighted is I understand inflation being a concern. However, the part of inflation that is felt most strongly right now are these inflated gas prices, or at least that's one of the absolute top. And that's only going to continue to be the case if we continue to rely this much on fossil fuels. And so to not invest now, to see how dire the situation is now. We have fires across Europe. We have a heat wave in the UK, which is so far north. We have a heat wave in America right now as well. And we're going to see all that happen. We're going to see these price increases on gas. And we're going to be like, let's not invest in something that will help us get out of this in the future. Let's double down on this recurring over and over again. It's just, Joe Manchin holds an interesting position in the Senate. I was listening to a podcast that was debating whether or not to make him the real foil for the Democrats or to like keep him on our side and keep Democrats like Joe Manchin in the fold. And, I don't really know where I come out on that. All I know is that he is deeply ingrained in the coal industry in West Virginia. And that conflict of interest just shouldn't go unacknowledged, that he is severely compromised on this issue. And this is an issue that is not just important for Joe Manchin, it's important for the world. And so I really struggle when the choice is not to proactively set ourselves up for the future. And so I'm interested to see what Biden can do through executive order, but that always makes me nervous as well, because it's not as stable as something more legislative.
It's always fascinating to me how politicians, particularly people who have spent a lot of their life in politics, can have no concept of the idea of a conflict of interest. They can see it in other people, but they can't see it in themselves. I can remember in Jefferson City, you get 163 members of the House of Representatives, and it's a somewhat part-time job. I mean, you do it for 5 months out of the year. So a lot of the people there either were retired from other professions or they were in other professions when they weren't in the legislature. And it was always incredible to me how people would get up and they would say, well, I'm speaking on this bill because I know a lot about this. Because, like, I remember one time there was a bill that had everything to do with basically a handout to pharmacists. It was like the pharmacy association in the state. And I remember this fellow, this is like one of the most minor ones, but I remember this fellow got up and he was like, I own a pharmacy and I want to tell you why this is really important. And I just remember being like, what? Wow, like you have no idea that that's supposed to be a disqualifying statement. You're supposed to vote present, and so it prompted me to. There was this thing I used to say all the time, which was that in Jefferson City, conflict of interest is regularly substituted for expertise, and that. So my point is, what Joe Manchin is thinking is not, I have a conflict of interest, and I hope nobody calls me out on it. What he's thinking is, I am the Senate's foremost expert on energy. I'm from West Virginia. And that's pretty messed up. But that's the culture of, I don't want to say the culture of Washington because that's pretty, trite. But that is the culture often of American politics, is to think whatever limited knowledge I bring to the situation makes me an expert, even if my experience actually makes me someone who stands to benefit from it going a certain way.
Yeah, and you've seen him flirting with like the Koch network, I think they've at least run ads at points supporting him for various actions he's taken. I think he views himself, he clearly seems to me like he's planning to run for re-election. There's a part of me that's like, great, because he's the only human alive who could carry that state for Democrats that I'm aware of. So that's great, and he tends to vote the way we need him to on things like judicial nominees. But I wonder whether he has to play this particular game, like you could do sensible things on climate. And a lot of this stuff it's not like a lot of this stuff is going to shut down coal power plants. This is not the equivalent of the EPA case that we're talking about, where it's like more regulation heat on them. It's just more of the stuff we want, more clean energy, right? And Grace, to what you said, like what could Biden do? There's one thing that's tucked into these articles that I'm just curious about, which is, it's being floated that he could use the Defense Production Act to boost renewables. Now, I have no idea how that would work in practice. Does he commandeer factories that already exist to make renewables, right? Or existing renewable factories to make more renewables? Does he buy renewables from existing factories and increase their production or whatever? But I just kind of like the sound of it. I'm like, all right, well, that sounds practical. And, assuming the Supreme Court doesn't stop him, which obviously is a big assumption, that could be really interesting,
Can I just say, like, there was something to be said for earmarks, right? There was something to be said for the days when we could have handled this in such a way where we're like, okay, we just got the majority in the Senate, and we recognize that, Joe Manchin he's really on the fence about a lot of our stuff, and he's in a powerful position. There was two ways to go. Like, we could have been like, well, we're going to persuade him as best we can on things like the filibuster and whatever, because, his deal, for everything else, like, he clearly sees himself as a guy who, I'm here to represent West Virginia. I'm not here as a Democrat. I'm not here as anything. I'm here to represent West Virginia. Well, if that's the case, then why is West Virginia not at this point the most modern state in the United States? Why did we not just say, like, okay, yeah, look, Manchin, you win. You've got us over a barrel here. Like, what do you need? Like, why does West Virginia not look like Coruscant from Star Wars? Like, it should be the state with high-speed rail in every direction, and it has everything and a full employment, and everybody's in. And we've moved the Department of Agriculture from D.C. to West Virginia, and after that, we're going to move, the FDIC and the Department of Energy. Like, there's going to be so many jobs in West Virginia, and everybody in West Virginia is going to have a 3-car garage. But also, there's no filibuster, and we have voting rights, and we've been able to do something about guns. Like, why have we not done that?
God, not to be so cynical, but does Joe Manchin stand to make any personal money if we move all of those industries there and insert a high-speed rail?
Speaking as a guy who operated in Afghanistan, I'm cool with that too. Like, I don't care. Like, at this point, like, I just want to save kids in schools and not have women be at risk and all that. Like, hey, like, if that's like, That was my gig over there, was not to figure out how to get rid of corrupt people. It was to figure out how to move corrupt people, because they were all corrupt, into places where they had less, access to their corrupt network of bad friends.
Well, on the positive side, Manchin was on West Virginia radio on Friday saying that he'd reconsider his position if the economy improves. And so there's at least some hope here.
By what metric? Sorry. But
I will consider doing something about the asteroid if they put the McRib back on the menu. Like, these things have nothing to do. I mean, it's amazing.
I mean, and in some ways it's like, well, okay, well, what about if we could improve, to Jason's point, the economy of West Virginia? Would that change something? I mean, as Ravi mentioned, where Biden is giving this speech is the Bryant Point Power Station, which used to be the largest coal-powered electricity plant in New England, but is now transformed into a plant that's making cables for offshore wind to connect to the power grid. So, a great space to give a speech in about, our need to switch to renewable energy, but also perhaps a great harbinger of things that we could bring to the great state of West Virginia.
I'm just ready. I'm going to print t-shirts that are like, give Joe Manchin what he wants. Just get rid of the filibuster. I need a shorter thing for the t-shirt.
Live show, West Virginia. Listeners, if you're out there from West Virginia, I know there are some of you out there, and if you think you can get a crowd in any town in West Virginia, it's in driving distance to where I am. So we'll consider doing a live show. We could do one of those cardboard cutouts of Joe Manchin and have a conversation with him. It could be really exciting.
We could put a little tip jar underneath, and we'll just offer him things. It'll be like an offering.
Oh man. Well, I think that's all we have here today. We got to grab an oar. And so I'm just going to start with one request of the audience. I am planning to hit the road for a month or two to just get out into communities that reflect certain aspects of either the polarization or idiosyncrasies of this midterm election. And so if you're in a place that either has a competitive congressional race, gubernatorial, Senate race, and you have some story on the ground that you think could be interesting, send an email to wes@lostdebate.com. That's WES@lostdebate.com. And I bet I'll find a lot of good content for Majority 54 there too. So any story on the ground, people you think I should talk to, or a town that's at war over something, that's the kind of stuff I'm looking for.
Regarding Invisible Storm, A Soldier's Memoir of Politics and PTSD, I actually just quickly wanted to say thank you. I know there's an awful lot of people who listen to this show who went out and bought the book, and that was very helpful. It is number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list, and that means a lot to me because it means a lot of people are going to get to read it, and I know that I've just heard from so many people who it's affected them greatly and helped them understand other people in their life, help them understand that they need to go get help them place their own trauma in context. And on top of that, all my royalties go to Veterans Community Project. So I wanted to thank everybody for that, and a little bit, celebrate it. A little bit of a victory lap there. That's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. Voicemails. We'd love to respond to your voicemails next week. In fact, in light of our conversation about inflation and the economy, we're going to have an actual economist join the show and help us make sense of all that's going on there. So leave us voicemails that you would like us to pose to an actual economist, like a real one in the wild. We're currently hunting them. We will trap them and bring them here, and then you will hear from them. The number is 508-687-2589, 508-687-2589. Hopefully we will find one that doesn't run very fast, and therefore be able to bring them here. You can email us at m54@wondermedianetwork.com, m54@wondermedianetwork.com for the same purpose. I'm at Jason Kander on Instagram and Twitter. Ravi is at Ravi M. Gupta on Twitter and Instagram. Grace is at GraceLynch08 on Twitter, and she would prefer you stay the hell off her Instagram. She's not interested in that. Thank you very much. And our show is at Majority 54 on Twitter. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.
Majority 54 is a Wonder Media Network production. It's produced by Grace Lynch, Edie Allard, and Adeso Agbenile. Theme music provided by Kemet Coleman, and special thanks to Diana Kander.